This is Avatar Sage 7 back again with an Outriders update. There's been a lot of changes to the game, or will be soon, eventually. I've already played about 206 hours at this point. All I can say is that the game has potential to be great. However, it still has a lot of things to fix and a lot of things to change before it truly reaches that potential. Could it replace Warframe or Destiny 2 for me? Maybe, but since this game is mostly focused on being single player, I doubt it. However, if they add more content in the future, it is a possibility still, depending on how they want to go in the direction. I mean, they have this huge potential here, this huge possibilities that they could implement for this game, yet they don't seem like they're going to actually take advantage of that. Well, the devs anyways. So let's first talk about the recent patches and updates. So obviously, they've been dealing with a lot of things like inventory wiping character restoration. So they've they're still going to be testing the restoration process throughout the weekend, so that's not going to drop anytime soon just yet. And obviously, there's been a lot of other news with the details about that, like the group A, B, and C. C being everyone else, A being the people who couldn't even access their account at all, and B being the people who could access their account but still lost a few things. B is not going to get as much as they would desire, but the reality is developers can't possibly provide absolutely everything back to the players without screwing things up for the people in Group C, which is everyone else. So they're also aiming to do a large patch uh, in the near future, but they're not actually going to say when exactly. So it's going to be one of those things that's still up in the air. And they're going to be fixing a whole bunch of things in that patch, obviously, including crashes in the game, issues, bugs, and crashes with multiplayer. Getting stuck in the sign-in screen, which they have no exit button, I might add, so I've already been in that situation. You have to literally Alt F4, and include lots of resolutions for gear mod, skill quest, level, and lighting bugs, as well as a bunch of community issues dealing with specifically with snipers, excessive knockback from creatures in Stargrave Expedition. To be honest, this is a problem with every one of their creatures that they have, the jumpers, the ramming beasts, even the elite bosses knock you back automatically if you get too close and start attacking them from elite. It's ridiculous the number of knockbacks they have. It's almost on the level of absurd, practically. So, yeah, and anyways, the crashing is definitely something I've experienced as well, even just before finishing expeditions, and the instability on multiplayer, even with people who are not on console. I mean, just the fact that every time I randomly join a game, there is lag with the yellow lag sign, or even red, the red really bad connection sign. It's just ridiculous how bad it is. I mean, even Warframe has much better, though not perfect, matchmaking systems where one player is the host for the other three. But this game just doesn't seem to do it very well. I mean, literally, if I go to an expedition, they eventually we finish it, but the guy usually either leaves the group or boots me because they just feel the yellow low latency sign is a problem for them, or it's screwing them up in terms of their speed or clear speed. So it's just ridiculous. They have other crashes like the bugged emergency stance with the golem effect that never goes away. Anomaly power tricksters who get stuck using Cyclone in an animation glitch. I even had glitches using Hunt the Prey where I can't even use it sometimes, but that rarely happens. So there is lots of things fixed, and they're still trying to fix. And as I said, the snipers almost never miss. Dealing with excessive knockback from creatures in Stargrave Expedition, like I said, it seems to be a problem with all the bosses that literally it's almost like Destiny 2's major story bosses where they literally hurl you off high level platforms to your death below, but here there's no platforms, but they still knock you back automatically, and there's no resistance to this. It really ticks me off. It's just ridiculous. This knockback effect should have like at least some sort of longer cooldown, if anything, per character, or at least overall. So like I said, they're also working on balancing expeditions, downscaling, and other key areas of discussion that the community made them aware of. And they're going to consider these things in the long term, so they're not going to do anything with it just yet in any upcoming patch. at the current moment. So in the previous patch back in April 15, 2021, they did nerf some powers for the Trickster and Technomancer because they were too good. Mostly the cooldown for Twisted Rounds, for example, which everyone thought was just ridiculous because so what if you make it 40 seconds? It's still, if you get enough mods that allow you to regenerate your ammo, it literally just, it means nothing to even do these nerfs, especially since this isn't a PvP game at all or has PvP balancing issues. So really, the community has raised a lot of these issues, and regarding the fact that this is a PvE game, why are they nerfing some of these things? It's already pretty difficult as it is, and just because some streamers manage to get really high up there with their build doesn't mean the majority of players are indeed making use of a lot of these things to a ridiculous level where they're like one-shotting bosses. Several of the classes do need some work. Primarily, the Trickster has been just feels really weak compared to the other three classes after you go through him. He has really high burst damage, but the problem he has little survivability. He has low skill leech. Most of his abilities don't cause any damage over time. He has no access to damage over time. Um, Damage over time status effects like bleed or burn or toxic, so he can't really get continuous health gain like the other classes can. And so he can only do burst heals, which requires him to constantly kill, which I suppose is sort of the way it's meant to be, but it's really high risk, high reward. So it's the fact that they gain it only in close range and they have to do constant close range damage means that they are often in the middle of groups of enemies who could probably all hit him and kill him before him or her before he can actually heal or he runs out of shield. So that's some pretty bad things I feel about the Trickster so far after playing it. Also, a lot of the abilities of the Tricksters do pretty much similar things. Venator's Knife and Slow Trap are both aimed at slowing enemies, but Venator's Knife in a way is better because it actually doubles the damage of the first hit on the enemy. So other than that, they both do the same thing primarily about slowing enemies, which is not particularly unique in that regard. And though Slow Trap is useful for regenerating shields for like the Harbinger, and Hunt the Prey and Borrow Time are both movement skills that are opposites to each other, true, but they both involve teleporting, which is not that super unique either. So some of this crossover of abilities is not great for the Trickster, so it really doesn't give the Trickster that many options for variety compared to like the Pyromancer, whose every ability is somewhat different from the others for the most part in terms of like he has ash and he has burn and each of them has an explosive bomb or does an area effect, but the trickster has primarily, yes, an area effect slow or targeted slow, true, but they both do slow rather than slow and something else. I would be more interested if they actually gave the trickster some sort of damage over time stats effect related to anomaly damage or something like that. So as I said before, Hunt and Prey is also kind of glitchy because it's hard to teleport, especially if the enemy has no space that you can teleport behind or it's occupied. And sometimes the teleport can glitch if somehow the targeting got screwed up due to fast clicking or something like that, which I've experienced. The Technomancer seemed weak. It turns out that the way the game is set up, the Technomancer is pretty well positioned to get through to endgame a lot better than many of the other classes just because of the built-in weapon and skill leech bonuses, toxin damage, and things like that. So they still are kind of easy to, they are still kind of not that, tough. So they do need some sort of close range defense of some sort that I've had to deal with for my own classes. So the other classes need to be brought up more on par with the Technomancer in terms of its overall survivability at endgame. That's what I feel. So the gameplay so far is like I said before, ragdolling and knockback is just ridiculous because there's so many elite monsters and bosses that do this that literally you're being knocked back. Especially if there's three crawlers that are shooting beams, you're being knocked back constantly until you die. So you're stun locked and killed. Cover remains as pointless as ever because by end game you literally have no time to use cover. Enemies rush you constantly or hurl grenades to flush you out. So at that point I almost feel like they should have just killed the cover system because it's totally not useless and put back some sort of jump or something like that instead. Like I said, the expedition's content is you have to kill so fast that you don't even have time to use cover, and so it's just ridiculous. And there's just so many enemies rushing you. Jumping There's really no jumping in this game to avoid attacks. Dodge rolling is also kind of useless half the time. You literally, not only is the telegraphing of boss attacks extremely horrible or very hard to see in some cases or hard to dodge, the dodging itself usually doesn't even allow you to evade damage. So if you're rolling through a fire patch on the ground, you still take fire damage instead of being immune for a few seconds, like in Guild Wars 2. The Crawler Beast sweeping beam attack still half the time it still hits you, especially if you try to roll through the beam, and instead of being able to like essentially be assumed to dodge under and take no damage. Snipers, as I said, they literally never miss you, even if you're, especially if you're not behind cover, they literally are going to hit you half the time practically. I mean, they still kind of can miss if you're very careful about the timing of dodge, but half the time it's literally impossible to dodge them, especially when you're concerned with like a whole bunch of other enemies rushing you. Enemy fire is also extremely accurate, which is ridiculous too. Warframe had this problem where the enemies could hit you and shoot you with extremely unerring accuracy, such that literally you'd had to be extremely tanky to survive, which is what I've found that I've had to do as a not like, crazy top-notch build player practically. Content, 15 to 20 hours at most of content is all you've got. Then you have expeditions, which could take eternity depending on how much time you have to devote, and it takes a lot of grinding to be able to get through expeditions at all, especially since you have to either A, discard your old gear and keep using blue gear that you have to convert to purple gear, which is extremely annoying because you just have to collect all materials or get enough scrap to do that, or you have to upgrade your purple gear continuously for a build that you've already enjoyed playing. You'll find that it's going to be an extremely long grind at lower expedition tiers for a long time before you even have enough to do it, and even then, without the right combination of mods, your purple gear may not give you enough power to actually get through and push solo anyways to get to the next challenge tiers. So regardless, PCF needs a more wider variety of content for their end game, especially since players are grinding through their PvE content, and sometimes they don't even have that much time anyways. So, but then again, this isn't a live service, so maybe that won't happen. And all they'll have are a few DLC expansions that might expand on the story a little bit, and that's about it, really. So there are really a few loose ends to the main story, which it feels like to me, anyways. For example, do you ever deal with Kang? We do know that some of the other bosses that you meet who didn't die in the main story do end up being killed in the expeditions, which is kind of weird, but I suppose that's doable. What lies beyond the anomaly in the Eye of the Storm? What causes the anomaly? And does the ECA and the Insurgent conflict ever end? And are there any other alien species on Enoch? These are questions I feel haven't really been answered to my satisfaction for a story, but again, this is a looter shooter, so they may not actually deal with that. Scaling has also continued to be an issue that they will address in some far off future update, which won't be anytime soon. So that if you have a level 43 character, scale down to level 35 in a level 33 game, because you're always 2 levels higher than the actual level of your enemies, this is to prevent your character from steamrolling everything in a lower level game, but you don't feel as powerful. But the scaling is really bad when it goes past like 5 levels below, because then you do extremely low damage that's lower than it should be. And so a lot of players have noticed this and have complained to the devs, or at least made note of this on forums to the devs, that this is what's going on. I really think that they should have, I mean, this kind of scaling is more like Guild Wars 2 scaling players down, but Elder Scrolls Online scales all enemies and players to the same level instead, so that even a low level player has his damage and power scaled up to the highest level player on the team, so that everyone feels somewhat more effective and feels like they're on the same level of power. And enemies are also like that. Usually in Elder Scrolls Online, they don't really bother to show the level of the enemies specifically. And similarly here in this game, it almost feels like they could probably have done something more like what Elder Scrolls Online did, but I doubt that they will ever actually go back to fixing that. Enemy variety remains, again, pretty short. There's like super tall two-legged aliens that you see at the end of Terra Infirma, but you never actually get to fight them at all, so that's kind of ridiculous. So there's lots of enemy types that they could have put in, but they didn't. So it's been restrained to a few enemy types in this current game version. Will we ever end up fighting more enemies? It all depends really on the devs. And of course, stats continue to not show up correctly in the inventory, such as your firepower, hit points, anomaly power, and armor can sometimes not properly show up until you log out and back in from the lobby or quit the game and then re-enter the game. So I've had times where I've upgraded the gear in my on my character to the 1 or 2 levels, but the hit points don't actually change, or the other stats like firepower and hit points, anomaly power, and armor don't change until I have actually relogged in. So it's kind of ridiculous that it can't do that correctly, or it doesn't show it properly, so that you're not sure if things are actually working. And of course, multiplayer continues to glitch constantly. Cross-platform or on crossplay seems to be the biggest offender, but I've had problems even with other players on Steam who just I join their game when they're hosting and they continually drop us, the other players, from it, or vice versa or something like that. So it's kind of ridiculous. And sometimes I start an expedition with a team and the other players don't even make the transition. So it is pretty bad. Still, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough that you notice these problems with multiplayer matchmaking. Similarly, the fact that when you go to randomly matchmake and you select expeditions, it randomly shoves you to any player who has finished the end game content. I mean, the not the end game, but the main quest, means that you could end up with a player who's just doing hunts or something like that, who's already finished the main quest, rather than jumping straight into the action of an expedition, which is their problem. So sometimes you also run into joining expeditions that the player is still at the base camp handling stuff. So it's not very good the way they set up expeditions, and it's not very efficient. It should drop you right into the action, but it doesn't. This is what Warframe does, and it does it well, but unfortunately Outriders does not do it well. So it feels like this game could have been a live service game if they had wanted. I doubt they want to. It feels more like they're going to do it Borderlands style, which just has multiplayer capability but does not have anything else. Um, Without sufficient content, obviously, you're going to burn through it and try to finish expeditions, but most people will find it to be quite a challenge to do so because of the level of grind and difficulty required. So it reminds me of Path of Exile in this regard. So I guess it's better to just maybe say that you finish this game and you move on for the most part. Most players probably won't even get to the point where they do expeditions at any level of detail because of its uh, amount of grind and difficulty to gear up. It's quite challenging as well, especially for solo players, because of the amount of firepower that they hit you with perfectly, and all the knockbacks and the exact amount of high damage that they do to you. So that's my updates so far on the Outriders gameplay and a review of the mechanics. So far, the level design remains the same as it was in the demo. I've linked to that obviously in the post below or on my site. So if you found this information useful, feel free to leave some comments or likes, as well as sub to the channel, and hopefully, I will have a chance to talk to you again next time.